Hello, everyone. Now, before we move on, I want to make sure everyone understands how to actually create a ChatGPT app or solution theoretically. Now, what we'll do in this video is we'll make a tech stack, or we'll understand how a tech stack of an app or solution that uses ChatGPT usually works. Okay, now if you're confused, that's fine. I'll go through it step by step. Okay, the first thing you have in your application or a solution is your front end. Now, this is exactly what the user sees. For example, if it's an app on your phone, then once you open up the app, whatever your screen shows, that's the front end. On a website, the website that you see is the front end of your application. Okay, so all tech stacks start off with a front end. It then connects to a backend. Now, this backend can be for example, on a website, the backend stack is usually things like JavaScript or PHP. It can be things that basically hold your data, so it can be a SQL database or anything like that. Anything that powers the front end, shows the front end what it needs to show, or anything like that. Now, front end and back end communicate, right? So front end sends information to the back end. In our example, that can be a prompt, for example, that the user wants to send to OpenAI. Okay? Now, after that, the backend will communicate, in our example, with a wrapper API. So what we'll do is we'll actually create an API, which we'll call a wrapper API, that will wrap around OpenAI. And the reason we do that is so that our backend and our wrapper API can connect and talk to each other. For example, let's say we create an application on a website that enables people to write cover letters. So they would need to post in the job description. So that goes in the front end in the form of a text box that gets sent to the back end, that then gets sent to this wrapper API that we'll create. That information then goes to OpenAI's API. So OpenAI has an API that enables you to access the models surrounding ChatGPT, which is the GPT-3 model. So what's really happening in the background is when a user opens up a website and puts in a prompt of an app that we make, is that information travels from the front end to the back end, then to the wrapper API that we'll create, then to the OpenAI API, and then to the GPT-3 model. The GPT-3 model, hosted on OpenAI's servers, will then compute and provide a response that then chains all the way back to the front end. And that's it. That is a very generalized version of a tech stack, and that's what we'll create in our applications. So for example, not in the next section, but in the section after that, when we create a serverless wrapper API, that's all about creating this guy over here. So that's how you know where the wrapper API fits now into our tech stack. Now, to give a more concrete example, let's go through the solution that we'll make later on in this course, which is called coverlettercreator.io. Now, this is an application that enables people to put in a job description and their own resume, and it'll actually create a very good cover letter for them. How does it work? Well, the front end is hosted on Bubble. So the person copies and pastes the job description and resume to a text box on a web page in Bubble. Bubble is also the back end because it'll take that text and it'll actually send it to the wrapper API, which is hosted on Azure Functions. We'll talk about what Azure Functions is later, but it's basically a serverless environment that can be used to compute functions. Okay, that Azure function will then take that and ping OpenAI's API, which will then ping GPT-3's model. And then again, the information will go all the way back up, back to Bubble, back to show the user in the front end the response to that, the response to that prompt, basically. Let's look at another solution. Another solution that we have here is called stockphotoppt.io. This enables users in your company to create stock photos when they're creating slides. Now, the front end of that application is done using Power Apps. The back end is done using Power Automate. And what happens here is that when the user clicks a button, a Power Automate script gets triggered that takes the prompt from Power Apps, sends it to that Azure function, and does the same thing. Sends it to OpenAI. OpenAI does the computation and finds the response, and then the data travels all the way back up. So I hope this makes sense because this is basically the platform or format that we'll be using to create our apps. And this is the format that you should use to create your apps too. Now, realistically, when you create an application or a solution, you will have many things pointing to the backend API. This over here is just one chain. You'll have another chain of services pointing towards the backend. You'll have another chain on this side pointing towards the backend. Another chain from this side pointing towards the backend. There's many different what we call microservices that point to the backend that then feed the front end. For our purposes though, we'll just focus on ChatGPT because that's what this course is about. One thing before we move on is, as you'll see, for all of these solutions, the wrapper API, the OpenAI API, and the GPT-3 model is exactly the same. So that's by design. This type of system will remain the same for every app or solution that we build. And this makes things easy for you as well, which means if you want to create a new platform, all you need to do is you need to switch around what goes on the front end and back end, and you can create an application that way. So once you've created the wrapper API, the OpenAI API, the GPT-3 model, once you've set up the linkages here, then everything else works really, really well. And you can put that into any single solution or application you want. Oh, okay, that was a lot. If that was still confusing, please leave a comment or question or message me directly. I'm happy to go through it again. This was a bit theoretical, I totally understand that, but I want to make sure everyone has a good footing before they continue, okay? Because especially this part, knowing that there's a wrapper API in between is important because there's a whole module on creating that serverless wrapper API that can talk to your backend and can talk to OpenAI's API. Okay, awesome.